Okay. Oh, I see Alicia. Hola, Alicia. Great. The first thing people are going to see in the recording is me saying, oh, hi, Alicia. Okay. So hi, everybody. Welcome to my talk on purposeful technology integration in the language classroom. It is my absolute pleasure to be at Solfi, and I look forward to all the wonderful conversations that are going to happen, not just after my talk, but primarily after the other talks. That's what I'm looking forward to. A few housekeeping announcements, as they say. So the presentation is being recorded. I will share a copy of the slides in my site, and I will give you the link at the end of the presentation so you can access it there. I am always happy for people to take screenshots and share with the world. I have no problem with that. All I ask is that if you tweet about it, tag me so that I can see it. And also just be respectful of other people's privacy. If you're going to take a screenshot and their names or their picture appears, try not to post that on social media, just post the slides. So the talk is organized into two sections, which correspond to my goals for today's talk. So the first part, I call it reflection, and that's what we're going to be exploring, some big picture things and questions and concerns. And then the second part is the application portion of it. And that's going to be where I discuss one particular example of a fully online course that I recently designed, and how that in a way reflects the reflection portion of it. So let's start with the big picture questions and aspects of technology integration. And I'm going to ask you to read this quote and type in the chat your reactions. It could be something as simple as I fully agree, I disagree, or anything at all that you'd like to say. What is your reaction when you read this quote? Teachers who use technology will probably replace teachers who do not. Let's see, I'm seeing some agree, clickbait. Hey, that's a reaction. Disagree, it makes sense. I agree, I hope not. I'm seeing a lot of agrees. Agree and disagree, definitely do not agree, disagree, it depends, could be. I love all of the reactions that I'm seeing. What kind of technology? Maybe, not fully, perhaps. Okay. A little extreme, okay? All right, so I like the reactions that I'm seeing. So yeah, it is definitely a thought-provoking quote. And it is on purpose. I like the reaction of clickbait. It wasn't clickbait, this was in an actual printed book. So there was nothing to click, but I understand that reaction, right? It's like the eye-catching makes you think right away, and it almost makes you want to respond to the author right away. And I do want to clarify, this is from a great book by Robert Blake. So it has nothing to do with the author. I just took the quote just to see what reactions you had from it. And I'll tell you why I disagree. I tell you why I disagree with this quote. The first is that, to me, it presents technology as a threat as opposed to as a tool. This idea of being replaced by technology is something that I think we need to move away from. Technology shouldn't be seen as a threat or as a problem. Rather, technology should be seen as a tool for empowerment, not for replacement. And the other reason why I disagree is because just this quote by itself gives you this idea of technology for the sake of technology. And some of you hinted at that in your comments. Teachers who use technology versus who do not use technology. But just using technology doesn't make you a good teacher. We know that. Just like not using technology doesn't make you a bad teacher. And so this idea of technology for the sake of technology, or technology for the sake of being cool, being relevant, it's something that, again, we need to move away from. What you see, speaking of clickbait, is a lot of these headlines or blog posts, which I understand you have to give it a catchy title that will make people want to go and read your blog. Things like 5 of the coolest tech tools, or the 6 top tech tools for world language classrooms. These kinds of headlines and these kinds of posts clearly focus on tools much more than focusing on the tasks. And what you'll see throughout my presentation is that we need to focus on the tasks much more than the tools in order to determine if someone's instructional approach is efficient. And if you've been to any of my other webinars or workshops, you probably heard me say, start with the task and then choose the tool. We need to know where we're going in order to figure out how we're going to get there. And so instead of starting with, oh, what a cool tool, I want to use it, and then you design a task around it, to me, we're going about it the wrong way, right? We should be starting with what we're trying to do, and then we figure out the best way, and that best way is subjective, right, to get there. So to put it in another way, ask not what you can do with the tech tools, but what tech tools can do for you. So instead of saying this is a great tool, what can I do with it? You're going about it the wrong way. You have to think, what can this tool help me accomplish? I already have a plan. I already have a task. Now let's see if the tool helps me or not. And the picture that I chose here of a keyboard is because when you think of a keyboard and you look at your keyboard and you see the letter G or H, which, by the way, they're my initials. You see them there. You probably don't think, oh my God, there's a G. I have to start typing words with G. You wouldn't go about it that way. You don't look at the tool first and then you figure out, how can I use it? You know you need to type something and then you figure out what letters you need to click on. And this reminds me of a quote by the great Michael Long about communication and language classrooms, and especially in terms of focus on form versus focus on forms, plural. And what he said is that thinking about what grammar structures to cover or what grammar structures to talk about, and then figuring out what are we going to do with them, how are we going to use them, is, he said, to put the proverbial cart before the horse. And in a way, that's what I'm seeing happening sometimes with technology, where we're putting the tool first and then the task. So thinking of communication in our language classrooms, hopefully, we're thinking of why, what, and how, right? We need to have a purpose for what we're trying to convey, and then we figure out the how, what forms are we going to need to communicate that. And again, hopefully, we don't want content to be subservient to grammar, right? So you don't start with the grammar and then figure out what we're going to talk about. Rather, you figure out what you're going to talk about, and then you figure out the how. And so the same parallel could be applied to technology integration. We need to start with why, with what our goals are. Then we figure out the what, the content or the task, the activity. And last step is the how, is the tools. So just like we don't want content to be subservient to grammar, we don't want instruction or our approach to be subservient to tech tools. And technology can be indeed wonderful and help us accomplish a lot of things and can enhance learning. However, I do think that technology sometimes can get in the way of learning. Sometimes technology can bypass learning, and sometimes technology can get misapplied for learning. And I'll talk about these 4 scenarios. So let's talk about the positives first. When technology enhances learning. Technology allows us for individualization. And for me, if we're talking about language acquisition, that is key. The acquisition process is very much individual. And so technology can allow us, for example, to help learners watch a video more than once, to slow a video down if they need to reattempt a question without everybody looking at them like they did something wrong, right? It allows for this safe space to try things out with the language. It allows us, obviously, in the case where you're giving options, it's easier, right, to assign something and the learner can choose which task to complete, for example. Technology also allows for more accountability, I believe. Why? Because when I'm teaching a class of 19, 20 students all at the same time, it's quite possible that some of them are looking at me, but daydreaming while I'm talking. And there's no way for me to know because I'm engaging with some of the students, but some of the other ones, they sort of get lost in the back. Now, when I assign something online and everybody's supposed to complete it, everybody's accountable for engaging with the content and responding. There's no way to just sort of sit in the back and not do anything. I think technology definitely allows for more efficiency. Even something as simple as a dictionary, right? When was the last time you used a paper dictionary? Probably you can't even remember, right? And even if I asked you, if you ask students right now to use a paper dictionary, I'm sure they would struggle. They would not even know exactly how to go about it, because technology has given us such an efficient way to look up words and then the antonym and then the synonym and then this and then that and how to pronounce it, all very conveniently presented in one spot. And so technology definitely has enhanced learning in that respect. Even something like giving feedback. I know that not everybody will agree with me because everybody has different preferences. But to me, when I'm giving feedback on a composition, for example, I love being able to type the comment and then 2 minutes later, I change my mind and I go and delete it or I go and edit it. When you're writing the comment, it's too late, right? you could scratch it out, but then it doesn't look very good, right? So to me, it's efficient and convenient for a lot of things relating to learning and helping us enhance learning. Let's talk about when technology gets in the way of learning, because it does happen. The most obvious example I can give you is lack of access to technology. We saw it very clearly during the switch to remote instruction in 2020, part of 2021. Where lack of access was indeed an issue. And I don't mean just, although that's a big one, right? Internet access, but I don't mean just internet access. In some cases, it was just the access in terms of specific plugins or things that you need in your computer, or access in the sense of maybe a webcam, right? Like things that we wanted the students to use, and then a lack of access to those tools in a way of learning. I would also say lack of access in terms of cost, right? So a lot of great tools out there are not free, and that can certainly create an issue when we want to use those tools. Another way in which I think it gets in the way of learning, particularly with languages, is the rigidity of answer keys. If you've ever taught any kind of course that had a component with multiple choice questions, with fill in the blanks, with things like that, you know that at some point some student asked, why is this not right? And you almost had to say to the student, yeah, you're right. This could also be an answer, right? So language is fluid. Language allows for many possibilities. And yet in computer graded questions, there is a level of rigidity that gets in the way of learning. Sometimes it could be just an issue with the answer key, which just leads to frustration. And it's true that not all learners come to us for help. And so in that way, it impedes learning because now the learner thinks that the other answer was correct when that's not actually the case. And then I do think technology gets in the way of learning in the sense of interruptions. Interruptions happen in Zoom quite a bit. If you taught online the past year, you probably experienced a lot of interruptions. But also even interruptions, and the example that I give is the use of video quizzes. I don't know if anybody is familiar with Edpuzzle or PlayPosit or Kaltura quizzes, where essentially you're watching a video and then questions pop up, right? And the video stops and you're supposed to answer. To me, it is extremely, it's almost like an art to create these quizzes, because if you time it wrong, it interrupts like mid-sentence and then it's kind of weird and you have to go back and look at it. Sometimes there are so many questions that keep popping up that it's hard to follow the whole content of the video. And so all of those things, to me, that's when technology gets in the way of learning. And then we get to when technology actually bypasses learning. And I know here's where you're going to disagree with me, many of you, and that's okay. Let's talk about it. But to me, online translators for language classes are an example where technology bypasses learning, or it could help the learners bypass learning. And the analogy that I give is the contrast between a self-driving car versus a GPS. To me, Google Translate or any other of these translators, which are getting really, really good, especially in languages like Spanish, are like a self-driving car because they can get you there even if you don't know how to drive. Lingui or word reference, to me, is more like a GPS. It helps you get there, but it won't drive for you. You still need to know how to drive. So in my classes, I do see a lot of value for tools like Lingui and word reference, but the way that I see many students, not all, but many students use online translators, to me is a case where technology bypasses learning because the students are simply putting words in English, entire sentences or paragraphs in English, and then they copy paste whatever Google told them to write, which is like the tech version of asking a friend to write the paper for you or translate the paper for you. Now, there's another case where you get technology being misapplied. And that is essentially when technology can give us a lot of things. Technology has a lot of potential, but then in the actual application of it, how we use it, it's not technology's fault, but it's how we use it that is not the best way to enhance learning for what we are teaching. And to me, the best example of this is flipped learning as applied to the language classroom in many cases. I'm not saying everywhere, but in many cases. So flipped learning originated in STEM, in science and technology, right, and math, where the students would watch these tutorial videos, these lesson videos, and learn these concepts, which then they would apply in class, right? Now, the problem is that STEM and SLA are very different, second language acquisition. Acquisition is not about learning about the language. So that model of learn about concepts and then you apply them, unfortunately, when translated into the language classroom, was a revival of PPP, present, produce, practice, produce, where learners watch these grammar tutorial videos and then they do a lot of drills, a lot of the practice. And then they're magically supposed to be ready to use all of those structures in class communicatively. And acquisition, language development, it just doesn't work that way. Just because you know a rule, that doesn't mean that you can now use it. So what we're asking the learners to do at home and in class are not articulated, right? That we're preparing them to do two completely different things. A lot of the flipped part is about explicit knowledge and learning about the language, but then we are expecting that knowledge to get translated into implicit knowledge that they can use to communicate in class. And it really does not work that way. At the very least, we can have a long conversation about explicit and implicit knowledge, but at the very least, you probably do agree that it doesn't work from one day to the next or from 1 week to the next, right? It just doesn't even work that fast. And what I see a lot is then we think that the issue is the platform, right? Oh, but yeah, you can't do multiple choice for language, or you can't do fill in the blanks for language. And to me, it's not so much the platform that's the problem. The tool is there. The tool can be used for many things. The issue is how we're using it. The issue is with the method. It's not with the platform. So can you do multiple choice questions where the learners are engaged in understanding messages and input? Yes, you can. But if you have ever looked at the vast majority of textbooks out there, that is not what the textbooks have in their online platforms. Their online platforms, which is what a lot of programs, especially in higher ed, use to set up flipped learning, are about explanations and mechanical practice, explanation and mechanical practice. So unfortunately, a lot of the textbooks and the flipped models are really PPP, presentation, practice, production. And I also think it's interesting when people say, well, I don't talk about grammar, I'm communicative, I don't talk about grammar in my classes. But if the grammar is online, and that's exactly what the students are doing, they're watching grammar videos and then doing mechanical drills, grammar is very much in your classes. Just because you don't talk about it when you meet face-to-face, it doesn't mean that the grammar is not there. Okay, and let's stop here for a few minutes to see if anybody has questions, comments, concerns, complaints. Claudia, are you still there?
Yeah, I am here, and I don't see much traffic in the chat.
Okay.
I guess that the dictionary thing was, I think, it's a little bit popular here in the chat about, there's a little bit of comments about the use of paper dictionaries.
Paper dictionaries, yes, okay.
You know, I think it meant a mark a little bit, nothing, I mean, I don't think there is a question, is there just, you know, comments about it. But if there are questions, it's well, I love this discussion. Thanks for raising these ideas. I think that the flipped learning, people agree with the flipped learning. Yes, at least Selena Costa said, yes, I agree with what you said about flipped learning. And Alicia Munoz says, I'm glad you pointed out about the flipped model encourages PPP. Yeah, so so yeah, I think they are not questions necessarily. If there are questions, please let us know.
I keep nodding my head.
I keep in my head. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Does anybody, if you want to turn on your mic and ask a question, you're free to do that. If not, we'll keep going, and then more questions. Time for questions at the end. Okay. All right. I guess we'll keep going then. Okay. So let's go to the second half of the talk. And this is where I'm going to give you one example. I don't mean to say this is it, everybody copy me. No, it's not meant to be that way. It's just that I understand how sometimes we get caught up in the reflection and the bigger questions, and then we have a hard time picturing, visualizing. So how do we actually make it happen? So I'm going to share one example. It's not perfect. If you've ever designed an online course, I think they say it's like owning a house, right? That you're never done remodeling. You're never done making changes and tweaks. So I look forward to seeing what tweaks you suggest, and I'm happy to incorporate them. So I'll tell you about the course so you understand the background. The course is called Spanish in the Professions. I didn't make up the course. I didn't name the course. That's just the name of the course in the catalog. And if you're in higher ed, you know how hard it is to change courses and content and titles and things like that. So that's staying Spanish in the Professions. It is a 4th semester course. We have a semester system. And in our university, students in most colleges, or at least College of LAS, which is one of the biggest, they need to have 4th semester Spanish level, not Spanish, I'm sorry, 4th semester language level to fulfill the language requirement. And many students do take Spanish to fulfill the language requirement for graduation. And so this particular 4th semester course is very appealing to students who are looking to fulfill the language requirement, not just because it does, but also because it seems relevant, right? Oh, Spanish in the professions, like maybe I can use some of this for my future. It is a fully online course. It also exists as a face-to-face course. I want to clarify that, but I'm only going to be talking about the fully online version, which is the one that I designed. The students have various academic and personal interests. Even though it's called Spanish in the Professions, it's not an LSP course, right? So it's not language for specific purposes. It is not a course, for example, we have one that VetMed, veterinary medicine, has specific for VetMed students. It's not that. So think of it as a general language course. So some students may have personal or academic interests that are not covered in the course. And some of them, yes, it might be relevant to their future profession. Some of the challenges that we needed to take into account were, first, scheduling conflicts. We had to make the course as flexible as possible. And so the course in the catalog appears, in the schedule, appears as hours arranged. So there aren't fixed meetings for the course. So it had to be primarily an asynchronous course. Motivation of the students was a challenge because, yes, you do get a few students who really do want to learn Spanish in the professions, but being a course that fulfills the language requirement, the vast majority of students take it as they're getting close to graduation, and all they want is to pass the course so that they can graduate. And another challenge that we had experienced in online courses, but in courses that are required for the language requirement in particular, is academic integrity. When students, all they want is to pass a course, many of them try to find the path of least resistance, right? So many of them try to find shortcuts if they can find them. And so part of the challenge, part of the things that we wanted to improve was to minimize issues with academic integrity. And yes, online translators were the biggest culprit when it came to academic integrity. Something that I get asked a lot is, what was the timeline? This happened in the middle of a pandemic as we switched in 2020 and all of that was happening. I was right there designing my course, pretending the world kept going. So the first thing that I had to do was to determine goals, expectations, content, organization, and then tool selection. So planning is probably one of the biggest phases of online classes. I'm hearing some background noise. I don't know if everybody else is hearing it. If I could kindly ask people to double check that you are muted, I'd appreciate it. Claudia, can you help me maybe like mute the unmuted?
It's what I'm doing right now. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I understand sometimes it's hard to see if you are muted or not, but I keep hearing somebody talking. So that's why, thank you so much. Okay. The other bulk of the creating of the course is about content development, right? So the audiovisual materials, the quizzes, the assignments. But as you can see, and the proportions are on purpose, the vast majority of creating an online course is about the planning, very careful planning, and the creating of the materials. Everything else is relatively minor compared to those two things. So as you know, when you create an online course, the bulk of the work happens before you actually teach the course. Yes. Of course, there were other final things to put in place, such as the grade book, make sure instructions make sense for the students, making adjustments after teaching the course. And this is continuous, right? Especially with tech tools that may change in terms of cost and things like that. So the first thing of planning was to determine the goals of the course. So yes, communication was a big one, right? So I wanted to strengthen the students' ability to communicate in all three modes. And by that, I mean I mean interpretive, presentational, and interpersonal. So the 3 modes according to ACTFL. I also wanted to make sure that it was the 3 modes in both modalities, written and oral. Part of the course, especially being called Spanish in the profession, is about making these interdisciplinary connections, right? The connection between Spanish and many other disciplines. Strategies for lifelong learning was one of the goals stated in the course description, and I do think that it is indeed an important one to include in your courses. So I'll show you in a minute an example of how I try to incorporate that. Something that I think was absolutely crucial for many courses, but this one in particular, to help the learners appreciate the presence and the vitality of Spanish in our local community, also nationally and internationally. And with respect to the other C, the culture standard, I am going to be very humble here, and I aimed for knowledge of cultural products, practices, and perspectives, with maybe getting a step closer to intercultural competence. By no means I'm claiming that students are interculturally competent after one course and after this one course in particular, but at least I wanted to increase their knowledge of different products, practices, and perspectives related to the topics of the course. Along with the goals, something that I think sometimes we skip or don't think about too hard is expectations. And this is really the backbone of everything in your course. You have to know the level of your students. I had taught the course before designing the fully online version, and I knew where the students were at. And yes, I am ACTFL OPI certified, so I've been trained and I can sort of recognize where students are at. And if you are not sure, what I would probably say is, like, the bulk of the research in terms of higher ed programs do say that students in 4th semester after 2 years of study about end up novice high, intermediate low. That's the average, right? Claudia is nodding. Claudia knows about this too. And it's the reality. You might be thinking, oh goodness, 2 years and all we got was novice high. Yes, that is what the research shows over and over again. Is that true for every single program? No, I said average. It depends a lot on the program, of course, and it depends on the students. I'm not saying every student is novice high, but the average is novice high, and some do get to intermediate low. So that's where I had to stay and see how far I can push them, being realistic. I'm not going to get them to intermediate high in 1 semester. It's just not going to happen. But how can I get them to maybe have a solid intermediate floor, right? I know I am such an ACTFL person, but it's like, like that they stay at intermediate, that they're not falling back to novice, right? That's what I was going for. And so these expectations of proficiency affected or influenced the texts that I selected. And there was just a conversation in Twitter about this morning about authentic resources for novice learners. And yeah, I created a lot of things, if not all of them. And that's because I needed texts that were appropriate for novice high, intermediate low. The task, what am I asking the students to do? Can they do it at this level? And the rubrics, right? This is, the tests and tasks are fantastic. And this is what a lot of what we focus on. What do the students look at? The rubric, the grade. How am I gonna be graded? How harsh is it, right? Is it gonna frustrate me? So the rubrics need to be worded in a way that students understand it and that they are realistic for your expectations, for their proficiency level. And I have to tell you, I didn't include them because I don't have IRB approval to be sharing them, but the comments that the students made at the end of semester surveys just told me I was on the right track. The students noticed that the rubrics were not about grammatical accuracy, that the rubrics were all about comprehensibility. Even if, and I don't mean the first try, I didn't understand you, tell me again, I understand you, good. You increase comprehension, that's your level. Right? And the students really appreciated that. And yes, I did include text type, which means, like, if they can tell me simple sentences, that's what I was going for, not paragraphs. We're not advanced. And if they could, it takes comprehensibility and the content, of course, that they were able to answer the questions, or that they told me the information that I asked, right? So again, the assessments were not formative assessments. Yeah, they were maybe more specific to the topics and the vocab, right? But the bigger assessments were not about how do you say this, or can you conjugate this verb? That's not, the big assessments were not about that. They were about, can you communicate? Can you understand what I'm asking you? And can you express meaning back to me? And then I had to figure out what content, what topics we were going to be covering. And they were selected based on the course description in the catalog, because that's what students read and that's what students expect. Our students and their interest, to some extent, as best as I could, I took that into consideration. In faculty input, I did consult with other faculty members to see, what do you think this course should include, just to get some ideas. So the 7 modules that I settled on were, number 1, professional traits and skills. We started easy. Adjectives, things like communication skills, transferable skills, you know, professional traits in terms of things like responsible, organized, some cognates, right? We got to start them, you got to start the students to feel comfortable and confident in what they're doing. Then we moved on to personal information, which to you might be like, seriously, asking names and addresses, that's Spanish 101. But you'd be surprised how many students, if you ask them their phone number and they struggle to tell you, or if you ask their address and they struggle to tell you, or if they have to listen to somebody give personal information, can they write it down? And they struggle to do that. So a lot of that we covered in that second module. Then learning and professional development, so different types of learning contexts, different types of courses, study abroad, internships, we talked about a lot of that. Personal and professional experiences. Module 4 was the only time I had any grammar. And yeah, I mean, to talk about experiences, you kind of need past tense. So there was a little bit of past tense, but all I gave them was the second person and the first person. That's all I needed. And then module 5, bilingualism and interculturality, which was the students' favorite module. And here's where I really simplified to them, all in Spanish, explain to them like, what is proficiency and how do you establish your level? If somebody asks you, what's your level in Spanish? How can you answer that? And also things like, in terms of intercultural competence, what is it and how can you work towards it? And then modules 6 and 7 were about more specific, the catalog description, because the catalog does include these 4 things: education, business, medicine, and law. So I included them towards the end of the course because they were probably the more complex topics and more specific vocabulary. The organization in general, I kept in mind that the modules or units would be moving from input to output, that there would be a balance of modalities, both in terms of written and oral, and as best as I could throughout the course and even throughout the module, the progression of difficulty and complexity, right, from easier to a little bit harder. When it came to the tool selection, the first question I asked myself was, what do I need to do? So if I needed students to record a video, that's what I wanted. I wanted something that they could use to record a video. And then I went from there. If it was me, I need to be recording videos. What can I use? That was my starting point. Anything that the students had to use had to be user-friendly. This is a mostly asynchronous course, and the last thing I want is for students to be getting frustrated, and for technology to get in the way of learning. Another key question for me was, can I do the same with what I already have? I don't like duplicating effort if I can avoid it. In some cases, yes, I'm a little bit picky about my tools and I have my preferences. I use Camtasia for screen recording. Could I do the same in Zoom? Yes, but I like Camtasia. So it's one of those things that maybe you already have it, are familiar with, and you can edit it and you can do, you know, annotations and things like that. So you know, that's just my own personal thing, but I happen to have it, so I can do that with what I already have. And of course, is it worth it, both in terms of things that were going to be paid versus free? So if it's paid, is it worth it? And I'll tell you which tools I used and for what. So the units, the modules had a lot of interpretive because my learners are novice high. They need a lot of input. One thing that all lessons or modules had were video lessons contextualizing the language. So these were recorded by me. I got authentic resources online, and I got, you know, my university to approve in terms of copyright and things like that. I used a lot of screenshots, which you can use as long as you cite where you got it from, and as long as it's just used for educational purposes, of course. And so, for example, the two screenshots you see there, one of them was a class schedule from my own high school. And so I would sort of walk the students through it, like, what is this thing called recreo, right? And that's the break, right, that the students have. Or do you notice how many, you know, science classes they have and things like that? And then the other screenshot that you see is for a lawyer's firm in Miami in Spanish. And I did that on purpose because I wanted them to see that these authentic resources can come from here, from the US in Spanish. I didn't need them to understand everything in it. I would just highlight the words that we had been talking about that were part of the vocabulary. And then after the lessons, the students had quizzes, and the quizzes it basically focused on using a lot of this language that was covered in the video lessons. And a lot of them included audio questions. So I recorded the audio with Audacity, and I embedded the files in Moodle. And so some of them, so for example, the first screenshot you see there says, listen to the questions and write your answers. So this was one way in which I would get the students to be listening to somebody, because since we didn't have face-to-face classes or synchronous classes, this was one way of compensating for that. But also because I didn't want them to copy paste the question into Google Translate. I wanted them to listen to it and then answer. And you might think, oh, they still got away with, you know, a lot of them I could see the big difference between the written questions and the oral questions, and how for the oral questions, some of them had a little bit harder time understanding. So I knew they were not using an online translator, and sometimes they would reach out to me, and that was perfectly fine. And they would tell me via email, in question, blah, 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 are you asking this or that, right? And so I would then be able to help them. And that's part of negotiation of meaning, right? That's what we want. And then in the second screenshot that you see there, that's a computer graded question with fill in the blanks. But what they had to do is I recorded somebody leaving a phone message. I can't remember right now. I think that's the one with a phone message, or somebody giving their personal information, and the students had to take down the message or take down the information as requested. So the first name, second, last name, the address, the phone number, and things like that. More interpretive, yeah, I recorded interviews. Some of the interviews were previously recorded by a former faculty member, which were great. They were a little bit too hard for novice learners, so I didn't use all of them, and I only used part of them. But I recorded a lot of new interviews, which were just audio interviews with images, sometimes to enhance comprehension. So I put the audio and I created the video around it. So I did an interview, for example, with an instructor of the course, Spanish in the Communities. So the students would listen to this very short interview, edit it at times, like if the person just kept talking, like manageable chunks for novice learners. And then the question was, would you like to take this course, yes or no, and why? List pros and cons based on what the instructor said, something like that. So again, I'm not quizzing them on a specific vocab. I'm not quizzing them on grammar. It's just about understanding language and engaging meaningfully with the language. And the other thing that I created were video readings. That's what I call it. Video readings essentially were a screencast of all the text spelled out as much as I could on a PowerPoint slide and me reading. So all they would see was the text and the audio. And the reason to do that was because I wanted them to read, but again, I did not want them copy pasting into Google Translate. Plus, this is called bimodal input. And so they're getting the written oral at the same time, and it could help with focus on form, and it could help with them understanding how to pronounce these words. And for the few heritage learners we have, I do think that it's also good for making that connection between what the word sounds like and what it looks like. Okay, presentational communication. We have presentational writing and presentational speaking. These were not worth very much, and that was on purpose. Why? Because yes, this is where they're very tempted to use online translators. So if they chose to cheat, and I would tell them, and this is actually in the syllabus, if they chose to cheat, I was not going to go and chase them down. They just knew that, great, you won 1 point. Right? Like, it's just, that's not going to help you. And what I do say in the syllabus is you're missing out on your chance to practice. I know Claudia doesn't like that word, but practice for the final exam, right? Like what the students had to do, and it was proctored. So examples of the written forums, and one for the first one with professional traits and skills. They had to write a post where they just said what they are like and what skills they have. And then the response post, if you know me, I'm very picky about what the initial and response post are. The response post was, what career fields do you recommend for your classmate based on the description that they gave? So it could serve as input for the other learners, even if they chose to cheat. Of course, the other learner could have just put it in Google Translate. But again, these were worth so little that to me was more about do it because it's good for your Spanish, not just because it's good for your grade. And then the other example that you see there, and this is part of the lifelong learning, if you will, I had them review apps, language learning apps, some in particular that are free, and they had to take screenshots of the different things that they had tried out, and then they had to write a simple review of what they liked and didn't like and what they did in that site. So other learners can then see it, and they say if they would use that app or not. And believe it or not, many of them did not know about them. They only knew about Duolingo. So for a lot of them, they thought I could keep using this. And some of them told me that they would keep using these apps. Presentational speaking was done as recorded presentations. So the first one that you see there, that one was more creative. And the students had to create a company and 2 candidates using recycling a lot of this vocab that we have been talking about. And then the classmates watched the presentations and they had to say who gets the job and why. So again, serving as input for the other learners. And then the other one you see there is a presentation by a student, and this was in Unit 6. They could research anything about education systems in Latin American countries or in Spanish-speaking countries. And so this student, for example, chose to research the cost of higher ed in different countries. In terms of interpersonal, there was something that I call preparation for interpersonal, and that was done as a formative assessment, and I used a tool called Extempore, which I am a big fan of. And the reason why I like Extempore is because the students read or listen to a question. The screenshot you see there is a video question where I say the question to the student, and the recording starts right away. So they have no time to be Googling things, to be asking somebody, to be writing a script, to be memorizing things. It is absolutely spontaneous. And I'm happy to talk more about Extempore if you have any questions about that, but it definitely helped the students to feel more comfortable expressing themselves to the best of their abilities. And that was essentially what they had to do for the interpersonal portions of the course. One of them was through Language Amigo, which is a platform that allows them to connect with Spanish speakers, and they had individual weekly sessions. And again, this is one way I think technology help us not only enhance but transform learning, that you can have an individual conversation with somebody in another country, right? I think that's fantastic for language learning. And they had 2 conversations partners throughout the course. And I thought that worked very well because it gave the balance of continuity of knowing that person, but also some contrast. So they might hear slightly different information, even from the person from the same country. Not the same person, but even from people from the same country. And also a feature of Language Amigo is that they get feedback via email, which I could do without, but the students really like. So the students were happy to get a little message from their amigos with some things like what they did well during the conversation, and then some things that they could do to improve. It was pretty informal. It was not about their grade. And then the summative assessment were instructor-led conversations via Zoom. I met with 1 or 2 students at most, definitely not more than 2. But it lasted 20 minutes on average. And yes, since I am OPI certified, they were, I guess you could say, OPI-inspired interviews. Of course, they were all connected to the topics in the course, but they were a conversation. So I would go wherever the conversation went. It wasn't a matter of, I'm going to ask you a question and you answer and I'm going to grade you. No, I was like, oh, that is really cool. Tell me more about that. You know, wherever the conversation goes, that's where we went. And also, I could adjust the way I asked the questions. I could adjust, you know, how to make myself comprehensible, which sometimes when you do 2 students interacting with each other, if they're novice learners, it's really hard for students to do, right? When the communication breaks down, they don't know how else to make themselves understood. When they're talking to you, you can definitely do that successfully, right? And so I know I'm running out of time, but I'm almost done. What I'd like to close with is a reflection on the word technology itself. And the word technology comes from the Greek techne, which is actually about art or craft. And I think that we have to keep that in mind, how we use technology. We have to remember what our craft is, what we're trying to do, and put our own perspective, our own art into it, as opposed to letting the technology drive our curriculum. So thank you very much for your time and for being here. If you are on Twitter, please follow me and let's chat on Twitter. The YouTube videos that Claudia mentioned, you can find me on YouTube. It's called Unpacking Language Pedagogy. And my site, where I will post a copy of these slides, and there are many, many other things on my site, is go.illinois.edu/TLTL.
Okay. Perfect. That was absolutely wonderful. Wow. I mean, I think everybody was just listening to you. Can you? Yes. Yeah. I
and
see a lot of traffic. Yes.
I'm happy to talk more about the course. I know that I went a little bit like, you know, on the surface, right? Just kind of give you an overview of it. But if you have more specific questions about it, just let me know. And I'm happy to share things like the wording of the syllabus for the forums, anything like that. Just let me know. The rubrics.
Thank you, Florencia. Thank you. That's very generous. Let me just ask you a question that Lauren Hedrovitz has asked. It says, Florencia, amazing always. The idea of a flipped classroom is very popular across the nation. Flipped classroom, that is having students do rote grammar tasks prior to their arrival in class, where they will do communicative activities using the grammar studied at home. What do you recommend as a replacement of sorts?
Lauren.
Yeah.
Lauren is I don't know. Lauren is a great friend and colleague, and she was my TA. She has been my co-presenter. She has been, I guess, my student when I was in her dissertation committee. So Lauren, I tried to convey that idea in the example that I gave, but what I would probably say as a more general answer would be to have the flipped part focus on interpretive communication, focused on understanding messages. And it doesn't have to be with the video lessons and recording things, but it does have to be about understanding meaning, right? So that has to be the core of that flipped part. I have no problem with match the word with the picture. Okay, like that's one way in which you get them exposed to the, like I have no problem with that. And my issue is with here's the grammar explanation, now conjugate these verbs. We know that doesn't do anything. A lot of the things that we see in textbooks are mechanical drills where the meaning does not matter. The learners are not processing any meaning at all. So instead of making form meaning connections, is a form connection, which it doesn't do anything for what we want them to do later on in class. So if we reframe the activities where the learners are engaged in understanding message and understanding language, that is a great step towards it. Yeah. But of course, it has to be about what the goals are and what we want them to do. So instead of the activities being so disconnected, except for the grammar structure, which is like a tiny little thing, the activities should be directly related to what they have been doing online. So if in class you're going to have them describe their routine, oh boy, online there's got to be a lot of the routines and put in order and match and routines. Like it has to be directly connected. I know I'm simplifying language acquisition a lot, but at the very least, there has to be that content connection and not just you learn the present tense, now tell me your routine. Mm-hmm. I cannot do that. Right, that is too big of a jump.
Wow, yeah, exactly. So yeah, I think many of us agree with you on this one. The coherence, in the materials and what students have to do. So there's another one here. It says, from Aurora Castillo, what would you change? What would you change or add if you teach this course face to face?
Yeah, that's a great question. To be honest, I would keep a lot of the online things because of what I said in terms of accountability and individualization. I would not take that out. What I would probably add is perhaps more, in-person discussions, if you will. I would probably perhaps move some of the things from the video lessons to an in-class activity. But again, I want the learners to have that space to try things out with language on their own and to process input individually, and not to let's all look at this and all answer, and essentially maybe only 4 or 5 students are actually answering and everybody else is just watching passively. I want them to engage actively with the input, and the only sane way to do that is online, one-on-one, you and the computer, so to speak. But definitely one thing that I would move is the open-ended questions. I know people are going to think like I'm anti-Google Translate, but it's an issue for us, right? That if the learners for the open-ended answers are just copying and pasting from Google Translate, there's no learning happening. So let me do that in person, and you write on a piece of paper. You can check word reference and lingua. You have no problem with that. But let's not just copy paste everything that Google told you to say. So that I would love to move that to in person. Yeah.
And you cannot argue that you're not using technology because a pen, can be a piece of technology, So use your pen, your pencil, it's a very good tool,
And what I do want to say though is because I'm the first one to say let's not be anti-tools to the point that we're reverting back to writing papers on papel y lápiz. Like I'm not saying that. Of course, we write papers. We as academics, we write in Google Docs or Word, and we use spell check, and we use yes, but we didn't get there by using Google Translate, right? So the students are not at that level just yet.
Yeah.
So yes, definitely use Lingui, use word reference, absolutely wonderful. Just not the whole copy paste the whole thing where there's no processing of language whatsoever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, there is another one that's I think you have. I'm sure you have a paper about it, but if you have it on the top of your mind, what are your 3 or 4 favorite tech tools for teaching language? And
yes.
There is a great article about you. I mean, about that from you. But if you want to just say what from the top of your mind, 3 or 4 tech tools.
Yeah, I'm gonna copy the link here. There we go.
Okay, perfect. that was fast.
I think that's the fastest answer I can give you. Read all about it. I think it's going to take too long to be explaining right now. Yeah. So just look at it. And so usually, yes, that's the number 1 question I get. And it's usually for what? That's my answer back. But yeah, I know for what is an annoying response. So I finally sat down and wrote what my favorites are and why. And it's a lot of what I mentioned today. Extempore, definitely. Talk abroad is my favorite, although we use Language Amigo, but similar platforms like that, definitely. And then other things, simple things like screencasting, like screenshots. The things that sometimes we take for granted, I think they're great for language learning. We don't have to get super extra fancy.
Yeah. Okay, so there's another one. I think we have time. We have a few more minutes, so I want to make sure that we can cover as many questions as possible. So Damaris is asking. I think that also the flipped classroom methodology reflects what we are assessing the students. Reflects what we're asking students. Our summative assessments are still based on what they know about the language instead of what they can do with it. I see that you have oral questions in your quizzes. What other summative assessment did you use?
So Damaris, that's a great question. Absolutely. You have to start with assessment. And if you saw Claudia's talk at last year's Solfi, you know all about it, right? You have to start with assessment. You cannot start with, and this goes back to goals, and this goes back to expectations, right? And you have to know what we're going to be asking the students to do. So the summative assessments in this particular course, in summative, I mean summative, as in like we're going to put it all together. We're not necessarily the oral questions and quizzes. Those were more formative because they did have more than 1 attempt. And I'm flexible with the students. Like if after the second attempt, they're like not understanding, then let's talk about it. That's the whole point of a formative assessment, right? It's not just the points. But anyway, the summative assessment was 1 oral and 1 written. So the written one were open-ended questions, sort of similar to what they have been writing about, but in a proctored way. So the students couldn't use outside tools. And they were graded using the same rubrics that were used for the forums, right? So comprehensibility, text type, and in content, right? Can they convey the information requested? So it wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about grammatical accuracy. It wasn't about how many vocab words they used. None of that. Nope. I asked them a question like, in your opinion, what are pros and cons of online courses? They can tell me anything they know how to tell me. It wasn't about, oh, they didn't use that vocab word. If it's not relevant, I'm not going to force them to use it. In some cases, we did give them choices. Like there was one. So since I was going for intermediate, and one thing of intermediate is being able to ask questions. I don't want to give away what the exam is in case there are students watching, but things like they could choose like for a teacher, like what would you ask in an interview? I think it was something like that, or what questions do you have about this job posting, right? In a very simple description of what the job is. What can you ask at the end of an interview? Ask 3 questions, something like that. And again, they choose what to ask, right? If they don't know how to say salary, then ask something else, right? Like it's not about tricking them to use any particular vocab. It's about, can you communicate in this situation? Exactly. And then I think extempore in a way worked as an assessment, or mini summative assessments, if you will. And then the oral interviews were definitely a summative assessment.
Yeah, it's like kind of like facilitating or maybe promoting for students to use their own linguistic resources, right? Not something that you know
Right.
use, and to just use it, right?
We gave them the tools, right? We gave them the vocab,
exactly.
But it's not about I'm going to force you to use the vocab, but rather when you need it, can you use it? And look, if they didn't remember and they used circumlocution, great. I'm not taking points off for that.
Of course,
so that's what I wanted the students to learn. It's just that how can you use the resources you have, whether it is words you remember or whether it is how to describe that thing that you can't remember how to say. There's still communication, still counts.
Yeah, exactly. So there's another one here. Did you follow any specific approach, such as task-based, for example?
Not particularly. I don't like labels. If you know me, I have a thing with labels. No, I don't like labels. So I just followed what I know about language development and everything that I outline in terms of like constraints of what we can do, of what our students need and things like that. I did not label it any particular way. No.
Okay. So Laura Rojas says, sometimes students don't like to have different technology platforms for different tasks. Do you think that it is a problem to incorporate them?
No, Laura, that's a great question. And I agree and I understand, right? Not too many platforms. In this case, the students needed the LMS, the learning management system, which is Moodle. So that almost doesn't even count for the students, right? Like that's their starting point. And then the other two platforms we used were Extempore and Language Amigo. Everything else they could do with like within Moodle or for the videos, they could choose whatever they wanted. Some of them like iMovie, some of them like the platform that the university gives them, which is Kaltura. If they want to do Zoom, they can do Zoom. Like they had their pick to create the video however they wanted. So I think the problem with the too many tools or too many platforms is when you have too many logins, right? And then you don't even know where you're going for what. That's when the students don't like it. And for me, Extempore was absolutely like brilliant for what I needed. So it was worth it to have that platform. And same with Language Amigo. It doesn't do anything that I can do with what I already have. So again, that was necessary for me. And that's how we sort of explained it to the students. We never got any complaints about too many tools. Of course, the students want everything to be for free, and I wish everything were free. But the tools, they had to pay for a reason, right? I don't want them talking to strangers online. I need it to be safe. And a lot of the platforms that are safe cost money. And Extempore, I really wish there was a way to do it for free. Although now their free version is unlimited. So you could probably do it for free without having the students pay. And that's something that I might consider for the winter, to switch to free and see how that goes. And then we eliminate one cost for the students. I think as long as you explain to the students why, and the why is clear, then you don't get that much resistance. The resistance sometimes comes when you know that there's another perfectly good way of doing it and you're being forced to use one platform, if that makes sense. So as much as possible, give them options. When it's an absolute, you need to use this, explain to them why.
Okay, so are there any questions? I don't see anything. A lot of thanks, in the chat and very nice, comments. Thank you for the inspiring talk and the specific model examples. They say, thank you so much. I think that you, Florencia, have at least for me, for many, I guess, people, is that you have the eloquence and the clarity of thoughts and the articulation, that we need, like everybody, I think many of us are thinking things that you think, but you express them more clearly and more articulated in a very in a very, I want to say diplomatic way, most, then I said, I think Florencia is exactly what I was thinking, but she said it nicer, or necessarily, in a way that everybody could understand, okay, everybody could agree, or at least, consider your thoughts, So I really appreciate that, because like you are a very good speaker for what many of us are having their minds, right, but cannot express clearly. So that is very nice. I appreciate that. It's great to have you. And I don't know if there are other questions. It's 10:24. We have a break. So please note that from 10:30 to 11. And then we're going to have the plenary session with Dr. Gillian Lord. So are there any questions for Florencia? Dr. Henshaw bridged us to the linguistic components of SLA, another nice comment. So if I don't know if you want to say something else, or maybe we can just finish earlier, a little bit earlier, 6 minutes earlier.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you, everybody. Thank you for the kind comments, the fantastic questions. And again, I'm happy to connect. If Facebook, I didn't put it there, but we have a Facebook group for language technology. And so you can always ask questions there. We can connect there as well. We have if you teach Spanish, we have a Facebook group that Claudia and I formed on Facebook. It's called Spanish. Hang on. Spanish pedagogy in higher education. There we go. So we can always connect via Facebook, via Twitter. And I really do appreciate, I just want to say, I really appreciate all the kind messages, not just here in the chat, but throughout, on Facebook or email or the YouTube subscribers, like things like that, just blows my mind. It makes me feel so good. So I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Florencia, and thank you, everybody. So we're going to stay with the Zoom session open, but we are going to just take a break, 30 minutes break, and then we'll come back. Thank you, everyone, and see you later, Florencia. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.